You are listening to Travel is Cheaper Than Divorce. This podcast is for all those who may be struggling with their spouse or their children and the relationship with them. We help give you tips and tricks by using travel as the means to be able to help your relationships with your family. I will provide those tricks and other ways to help travel with little or no cost. So let's get into it. I can, over my time in my marriage, and we've been married for almost 20 years, can think back to the times when things were the biggest struggle between my spouse and I, were when I lose focus on her. And I mean this even in the case of your children. In my case, my children. It is important to nurture your children, to raise them, and to bring them out to be the best people they could be. At the same time, do you ask yourself this, and this is what I did for myself. Do you think your children are best raised by one parent or two? These are questions I ask myself literally. Do you think it is beneficial for or best for your children to live in a household where they can feel, because if you don't think they can feel, I promise you they can, that they feel like there is no love between you and your spouse. Priorities have been messed up. And that's sometimes what happened between me and my spouse. The priorities in your life should be your family. It really should be. Number one, family. For some of you, and for me even, it's God and family, but with a focus on this being what it is. Yes, your children are a part of that family, but if the marriage is broken at the top of the family, that's going to filter down. I told you before that I'm a child of a divorce. And that has affected not only me, but my siblings in a great way. Sometimes I imagine what my life would be like if my parents never got divorced. And I know that's more common now. And I know there's a lot of people out there who may say to me, as they have before, well, everybody has divorce somewhere in their family, so blah, blah. Okay, so we should just accept that? I don't. And I didn't, and I still don't. So what I'm trying to say to you is this. If you spend your time and your days worrying so much about your children that you don't worry about your spouse, you're doomed. I have spent some time in some of these episodes. I have been talking about getting away, and almost every time I talk about with your children, but that is not the most important thing you can do. From experience, this is not the most important thing you can do. The most important trips you can take are with your spouse, bar none. You want to be able to save your marriage? Then you don't go places with your children all the time. If you're going to rekindle a marriage, you're not bringing your children with you. Let me ask you a question, in fact. This is something you can struggle with yourself. Would you bring your children to a marriage therapy session? Of course you wouldn't. Why would you bring them everywhere you go? My wife and I, as I said earlier, don't have a perfect marriage now, but we had a worse marriage before this whole system and everything started with the traveling. And although we have traveled with our children, that has built memories. What has saved the family is not going on trips with the family. What saved our family was going on trips with my spouse. My wife has always wanted to go to Hawaii. My wife is a very big beach person, loves the beach. And at the beginning of this journey that I've talked about before, there is no way on this earth I was going to be able to take her to Hawaii. No way. No way. But once I did, which I did, and it didn't take very many years after I learned what I learned to be able to take her there for very little cost, our marriage truly hasn't been the same since. We built something. What does it feel like when you're sitting next to your spouse on a 6-hour flight? Or so, I don't know, maybe you're on the East Coast. I don't know, but 6 hours for us. And you're sitting there with her, and are you just going to avoid touching each other? Are you going to avoid talking to each other? Are you never going to hold hands the entire time? Maybe on the way there. Maybe your marriage is pretty rocky right now. But do you think on the way back you're going to feel the same as when you started if you go to a place like that? To a destination she's always wanted to go to? Because that seems impossible to me. We went to Hawaii, someplace she always wanted to go. And it's changed a lot of things. Because it brings the heart back into everything. You can't lie on a beach. You can't be with your spouse alone in a hotel room and not somehow kindle some of that back. Actually, you can even go through all of even some of the Hollywood movies and other things. You can see when people travel, there's just a different sense, a different feeling with your spouse, not with your spouse and your children. Now, I will tell you this. I didn't obviously start by sending my spouse and I to Hawaii. I said that was a couple of years after I started running the system that I've talked about or alluded to most of this podcast. We started with little trips to get away. And again, always out of the area. If you're just going to a hotel down the street, you're still connected to your household. And little trips can mean not even on an airplane. Maybe you drive 4 hours south or 4 hours north or 4 hours east or west. That's not really as relevant as just getting out of the area and getting out of the area with your spouse to a destination, meaning the hotel, that won't make you feel completely and utterly uncomfortable. Because, again, unpopular opinion, but my point of view here is that in a marriage, children don't come first. Everything filters from the top down. It's just like going to work. If you work in a very large corporation, I've worked in some of the more major corporations in America. The culture that is brought down from the top down affects the entire workplace. So if you think that... So ultimately what I'm really saying is, and this is from my experience, my wife and I, when we started wanting to travel, we just went sometimes just 2 or 3 hours south to the closest major city that was around us. And we did it once, what my wife and I decided, once a quarter. Did we do anything exorbitant? Not really. We went to a hotel room for 2 or 3 days, sometimes over a weekend. And we ate out a couple times. And maybe we went to a movie theater, which we could do in our own town, but it was different. Because you can rekindle a lot of intimacy, a lot of things that have been lost in your life by getting away. You bring your children with you, you can't rekindle that as well. So like I was saying before, in marriage, children don't come first. Your spouse, your marriage comes first, and that will filter down into your children. And this, again, this is what I'm saying. This is the same thing with your children. Now, to be upfront with you, this is a 2-part episode. I want you to be able to understand the importance of what I'm saying to you right now. You need to feel and understand that your marriage is dependent on you and your wife's, your family is dependent on you and your wife's passion for each other, the love that you have for each other, and not just passing in the hallways at a glance. It needs to be rekindled. It needs to be sparked. again. It needs to always be fed. That's what the word I was looking for. It just continually needs to be fed. What are you feeding it right now? So my wife and I, we traveled once a quarter together for a while. We don't really do that much anymore because our trips have become more all over the world and different places and other things because of the system that I talked about and alluded to. But the system that I have built and understood, and what I like to teach people, is not a system that can be done overnight. But you can't wait. I couldn't. You can't wait for the system to start. You can't wait for you to learn all the things you need to learn, and then I'll travel. And then what? In the meantime, you lose everything around you? You can't wait. This is not a in a year, maybe I'll get around to it. No, you do it now. Because I've seen what happens here. We start growing closer and closer every quarter. We did miss a quarter here or there too. I mean, it can't be exact. There has to be we had children in the home, as we've talked about before. We had foster kids, which is a whole nother animal because you can't have regular quote unquote babysitters babysitting foster kids. The state doesn't quite like that. So there was a lot of arranging we had to do. So if you feel like you can't arrange with your kids, if you feel like you can't arrange your kids or your dog or whatever, we had a really hard time arranging because of the foster kids that we had in our home. So don't tell me that. You don't have family? You think we had our family babysitter kids? We had problems with our family. In fact, my wife's mother at one point said, "Don't you ever leave your kids like this with us again." We decided from that point forward, we're never going to have her watch our kids again. We didn't do anything. We just dropped off our kids. But that's her mother, and that's a different story, but just an example of how it was for us. It's not easy. It's a whole different, almost a complete lifestyle change. But isn't that what you need? That's what we needed. We need a complete change of scenery. I mean, we had to get away. But I want to make it easy on you. The system I built allows you to travel in luxury all over the world, pretty much for little or no cost. But at the very beginning, it's not something that happens overnight. But you need to travel overnight. This needs to happen now. You don't have time to start something like this, whether it's quarterly, twice a year. The frequency is irrelevant, but it needs to be done like within the next couple of months with you and your spouse. If you're listening to my voice and this feels like something you need to do, then you just need to do it. In the second part of this episode, I'm going to go through a step-by-step on that. I want to teach you, even without the system, because the system is based on points and miles and getting all that stuff done for you. You won't have time for that. But there is another way to travel with cash that is dirt cheap. We did it. We had hardly any money at the time, but it is possible. And it needs to happen now because you have to save your marriage. You have to save your children. It's almost like I'm talking to my little self here because I wanted my parents to save. I wanted my children to be saved. I wanted to grow up so bad with my mom and dad, and I couldn't. Now their situation is different in most. Had to do with adultery and other things, but still, I'm just telling you how much divorce affects children. So you think you have to be around your children all the time to control them? That's another thing. You don't want to be a helicopter parent. This is a way to disconnect. They'll be okay. They'll be okay. And if you think they won't be okay, maybe that's a problem with you. Or maybe it's the area you live in. You have to have people around you to trust, to watch your kids. If you want to save your marriage, you get away from your children. So, what I want you to take away from this, and what I want you to know, if this sounds like you, then listen to the next episode where I go through part 2, where I go through the how to do it now, not the system. The system takes some time to build. This is the how for now, for you and your spouse. This is the Hail Mary. This is the thing that's going to help you now. I feel like you guys out there, the people I'm speaking to right now, you can hear me. So listen to me when I say, you go away with your spouse, you rekindle. You want to save your children's lives. You want to have them be raised the way they need to be raised, to graduate and become people of society that are good, and then to want to be around you. Do you want them going to separate houses when they grow up, and all your kids, your grandkids going to separate houses and wondering who's going to whose for Christmas? Do you want that? I know you don't. So, listen to the next episode. It's time to get away. It's time to get away right now, and time to get away not from just the area, but it's time to get away from your children. You have been listening to Travel is Cheaper Than Divorce with me, your host, David Packer. Please connect with us on our YouTube channel at Travel Point Pros. There you will learn many tips and tricks on how to use points and miles to travel in luxury for little to no cost. Remember to like and subscribe and comment on any of the videos that you find helpful to you. Thank you for listening.